There's a room in Washington, D.C., where 40 people sit around a table and decide how much your money is worth. Not through some dramatic vote, not through careful deliberation. They just do it. And every other government in the world has a room just like it. This isn't a conspiracy, it's just how the system works. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let me show you something. In 2008, the US government had about $10 trillion in debt. Today, 36 trillion. That's not a typo. The debt tripled in 16 years. But here's the strange part. The economy didn't collapse. Inflation stayed relatively low until recently. Interest rates were near zero for over a decade. So where did the money come from? The short answer is nowhere. It didn't come from anywhere. It was created out of thin air through a mechanism so simple that when you hear it, you'll wonder why anyone ever worries about government debt at all. But before we get there, we need to understand what money actually is, because most people think they know, and they're wrong. You probably think money is something real, something with value, gold sitting in a vault somewhere, backing up the bills in your wallet. Except that's been fantasy since 1971. On August 15th of that year, Richard Nixon walked into the Oval Office and did something unprecedented. He severed the last link between the dollar and gold. Before that moment, every dollar was theoretically redeemable for a fixed amount of gold. After that moment, the dollar became, well, whatever the government said it was. Nixon called it a temporary measure. It's been temporary for 53 years now. So what is money today? It's a shared hallucination, a collective agreement that these pieces of paper, or more often, these numbers on a screen, have value. The only thing backing the dollar is the belief that tomorrow someone else will accept it. Which brings us to the trick. When a government needs money, it has three options. It can tax people, it can borrow money, or it can print money. Most governments do all three. But the third option is the interesting one, because it's not what you think. Governments don't actually print money in the way you'd imagine. The Treasury doesn't just fire up the printing presses when it needs to fund a war or a stimulus package. The process is more elegant than that, more hidden. It works like this. Let's say the US government wants to spend $500 billion it doesn't have. It creates bonds, treasury bonds. These are basically IOUs, promises to pay back the money with interest at some point in the future. Then it sells those bonds to whoever wants to buy them: banks, foreign governments, pension funds, regular investors. But here's where it gets interesting. The largest buyer of US government debt over the past 15 years hasn't been China, hasn't been Japan. It's been the Federal Reserve, which is, for all practical purposes, part of the US government itself. So follow the logic here. The government creates debt. Then another part of the government buys that debt with money it creates out of nothing. The Federal Reserve doesn't have a giant vault of cash it's drawing from. When it buys government bonds, it simply credits the Treasury's account. Numbers appear on a screen. That's it. New money conjured into existence through accounting. This process has a name: quantitative easing. It sounds technical and boring, which is probably intentional, because if they called it what it really is, people might pay more attention. Between 2008 and 2014, the Federal Reserve created $4 trillion this way. Then, during COVID, it created another $5 trillion in less than 2 years. That's $9 trillion, just created, because it was needed. And you might be thinking, wait, doesn't this cause massive inflation? Doesn't this destroy the value of the currency? Isn't this exactly what happened in Weimar Germany or Zimbabwe? That's the logical assumption, but reality is messier. For over a decade after 2008, inflation stayed mysteriously low, between 1 and 2% annually, even as central banks across the world created trillions in new money. Economists had theories for why this was happening: globalization, technology, demographics, weak demand. But theories and certainty are different things. Then 2021 happened. Inflation spiked to 9% in the US, 7% in Europe, double digits in the UK. Suddenly, the money printing caught up with reality. Or maybe it was supply chains. Or maybe it was corporate greed. Or maybe it was all of those things at once. Nobody really knows. Economists are still arguing about it. But here's what we do know. The trick worked. For years, governments spent money they didn't have with almost no consequences. The system bent but didn't break, which creates a dangerous precedent. Because if you can create trillions of dollars to fight a financial crisis, why not create trillions for climate change? Why not create trillions for universal health care, for infrastructure, for anything that sounds important enough? There's a theory called modern monetary theory that takes this logic to its extreme. It argues that governments that control their own currency can never run out of money. They can always create more. The only limit is inflation. As long as inflation stays under control, keep spending. It's seductive and terrifying because it's partially true, but only partially. Japan has been testing this theory for 30 years. Their debt to GDP ratio is over 250%, the highest in the developed world. They've been printing money and running deficits for decades, and they haven't collapsed, but they also haven't grown. Their economy has been stagnant since the 90s, an entire generation living in slow motion decline. Is that the future? Endless debt and endless money creation, not leading to collapse, but to permanent stagnation? Or is there a breaking point we just haven't found yet? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Nobody knows. We're running an experiment in real time. Every major economy is doing it. The US, Europe, Japan, China, all of them, juggling enormous debts, creating money, hoping the music doesn't stop. And the thing about music is it always stops eventually. When it does, there are only a few ways out. You can grow your way out, create enough real economic growth that the debt becomes manageable relative to the size of your economy. That's the optimistic scenario. It's also very hard to pull off. You can inflate your way out, let inflation run hot and erode the real value of the debt. Your debt burden shrinks because the money you owe is worth less than when you borrowed it. This is sneaky. It works, but it also destroys savings and punishes anyone on a fixed income. Or you can default, just refuse to pay. This is what Argentina does every few decades, what Greece almost did in 2015. It's financial suicide, but sometimes it's the only option left. Most governments will try door number two, inflation, because it's the path of least resistance. The debt gets smaller without anyone having to make painful cuts or admit failure, but it comes at a cost. Every time you do this, trust erodes a little more. And money, remember, is trust. It's the belief that tomorrow this thing will still have value. When that belief starts to crack, systems fall apart fast. We saw it in slow motion in Venezuela, in Lebanon, in Turkey. The currency loses value. People stop believing. They switch to dollars or euros or Bitcoin or anything else that seems more stable. The government prints more money to stay afloat, which makes the problem worse. It's a death spiral. Could it happen to the dollar? To the euro? That's the unspoken question behind every central bank meeting, every debt ceiling debate, every inflation report. The dollar has an advantage. It's the world's reserve currency. Global trade runs on it. Central banks hold it. Oil is priced in it. That gives the US an extraordinary privilege. It can create more dollars than any other country could get away with because global demand absorbs the supply. But privilege isn't permanent. The British pound used to be the world's reserve currency. Until it wasn't. These things shift, usually slowly, but sometimes all at once. China is watching. Russia is watching. They're slowly building alternatives, trading in their own currencies, accumulating gold, testing digital currencies. They see the game, they know the trick, and they're preparing for the day when it stops working. So, what happens next? Maybe nothing. Maybe we keep this going for another 50 years. Maybe inflation stays manageable, and debt keeps growing, and everyone keeps pretending it's fine. That's possible. Or maybe we're in the final act of a story that started in 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window, when money stopped being a thing and became an idea. Ideas are powerful, but they're also fragile. The trick that lets governments spend money they don't have isn't really a trick, it's a choice, a collective choice to believe in a system that only works as long as everyone keeps believing. And the thing about belief is it's hard to measure real time. You can't see it draining away in real time until one day you wake up and it's gone. 40 people in a room in Washington, D.C. decide how much your money is worth, not through some grand design, just through choices made under pressure, quarter by quarter, crisis by crisis. They're hoping the math works out. They're hoping they can thread the needle, keep spending without breaking the system. So far, they've been right, but the gap between so far and forever is wider than it looks.